like when you hire a person on your team, there's typically a hiring manager who ends up being the direct report for that individual. Not all the time. Like sometimes the person doing the leading the interviews and writing the job description doesn't end up like leading that person. But I think most of the time, the person who's going to report to that eventual hire is part of that the decision making process in the interview process. Just like in Martech, there's often many voices on the decision making committee, a lot of people in the interview process. But what I've seen often with like a hiring manager for Martech, if you will, isn't always the person who ends up owning the tool post purchase. Do you kind of see that in your experience? Like, what are your thoughts there? How do you decide who owns a Martech tool after you purchase it? Do you ever see tools kind of fall through the cracks because no one kind of stepped up post purchase?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think, um, being in a B2B environment, we know that, even as a business trying to sell to customers or being a customer trying to purchase Martech, that there's multiple personas and user types throughout that buyer journey. You typically have an IT decision maker, you have your procurement team, you have the economic buyer, and then you have the ultimate like admin or owner or whatever you want to kind of call them. And then you have your power users and then you have the non-users. And so you kind of have to, if your organization is, large enough where you have a lot of these roles, you do need to like define them early on to understand how each role kind of plays into the various stages of the buyer journey, but also the adoption journey as well of that tech stack. And I think that's, often a miss. I've seen that happen at companies where they're either early stage or they're like growing and, rapidly changing their org structures, or there's layoffs happening, which happens in tech all the time. So oftentimes you lose that ownership of a particular tool for, various reasons. And, this happened for us, at the time of we were launching a product, and, one of the lead gen sources that we wanted to have was a live demo, and it ended up being kind of one of the highest lead generators for us.
Mm.
So it was really powerful. It was a very simple tool that we kind of invested in, nothing like super fancy, but just like, did the job that we needed it to do. And we stood it up really quickly. But then, after a number of like reorgs and changes that we had, we lost a clear owner of that tool.
Mm.
And I think that, loss of ownership really was kind of led to an opportunity cost of us not maximizing the full potential of that tool by, optimizing and iterating on it. And people had a lot of great ideas, but those ideas fell through the cracks because they didn't know who to go to
Mhm.
make those updates and optimizations. So I think, I see this happen quite often is with all of those changes and that chaos, you do lose ownership. But I think as a MOPS team or as a marketing org and a marketing leadership team, you need to always ensure that every technology has a tool, has a backup, or has an owner and has a backup owner as well, to ensure that you're continuing to be accountable for it and you're continuing to get the most value out of it.
Yeah, such a good point. I feel like that's what sometimes makes MOPS teams, or like sometimes the one person MOPS person
The one MOPS
have,
person.
yeah, have a really good like retention power on the team. Like they are the admins of some of the core infrastructure tools that you have in the company. And, if they leave, we need to figure out a backup solution here. And oftentimes the default is, all right, let's post up a rec, let's backfill the role. But in the meantime, like we need someone to figure that stuff out. So we
Yeah.
outsource it and we find an agency to come in, backfill for a couple months, even help us with the hiring process, and then we hire that person. But the whole like backfill discussion is an interesting comparison to the analogy, because like just like in hiring, sometimes it's not a new tool or it's not a new role, you're backfilling, or you're trying to like upgrade. Sometimes you're like moving on from a tool. In the Martech world, like that means a massive migration project. And we're chatting about this before we press record. Folks who've had the pleasure of several battle scars from migration projects, like the both of us have, in small and big teams, like these are massive projects. And I've seen this all the time. Like I'm at a company, we like our stack, like things are fine. New senior leader joins and they're just like, "Oh, you guys aren't using X tool. Like I've used X tool at two of my last companies. I'm pretty sure it's better than this." Or like, and they don't take time interviewing people and like if the current stack is okay, and they're just like the first thing I'm going to do as a new senior leader team is just going to rip out a couple of things from the stack. And when they ask me like, what have I done? Like, I saved a bunch of time and money by like ripping out these two tools and I'm bringing in this new tool. I don't know. I feel like there's like for sure a migration of project and tasks and ownerships that you have when you have a backfill employee, but it doesn't feel as like intense as migrating a key Martech tool. What do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like the unfortunate times that I've been part of migrations throughout my career, it's always been, it continues to be a triggering point because it's never like a happy, fun experience to go through a migration. And oftentimes these are multi-year projects
Yeah.
that continue to extend, timelines continue to get pushed. And then I think the hardest part of it is dealing with the transition. So like the carryover from
Hmm.
your old technology and all the mess there and like, the new and how it all kind of comes together in a seamless way. And oftentimes, I've seen that you wrap up the project and for like years to come, that mess is still not fully clean. And like, people are still like new people are joining the team. They're like, what is this? Like, what does this mean? Like, this is not completely misaligned or inconsistent with how we're currently reporting or how our data is currently enriched. Like, what does this field mean? And it is tricky. And I haven't, to be honest, like seen any one example from my years of experience to say that migration went so smoothly. Everything went fantastic. There were no issues and we're just like smooth sailing. So yeah, migration is not fun. And it's weirdly easier with people. Oftentimes you have people going on mat leave or paternity leave or whatever that looks like. And it's easier to kind of fill in that gap short term, even though it might not be as good, or maybe it's a little bit better, who knows? But it's easier to do that with people than it is with technology because technology gets so ingrained in your company's DNA, in your overall operating model, and your systems that it's harder to make that change versus I think with people sometimes depending on like their level of seniority and their overall impact, it can be a little bit easier, unfortunately.
Yeah, I will say I've never done a migration at your scale compared to like Shopify and Dropbox. Like I can't imagine. I think like some of the bigger ones too, like might have come from acquisitions, and then this new acquiring team has their own tech stack, and it's like, all right, how are we merging those two things together? Yeah, lots of folks have chatted about that. I agree. I don't think there's ever been a migration project in Martech where it went 100% smoothly.
Yeah.
This is like where agencies I feel like are perfectly suited to come in and just be like, hey, we have a plug and play process for this. We've done 17 migrations from that tool and that tool. That's exactly what you guys are doing. We're going to do the whole setup for you guys. You guys will focus on like that transition period but like there's still like so much context to it and nuance to what you're doing, and they're like trying to audit your systems and they're like, all right, like what are these 17 nurture flows, and do we still need all 7 to recreate in the new one? And then you have to spend time explaining what those were created for, and maybe the person who created them isn't even with the team anymore. And there's a
Exactly.
whole process of like cutting, improving, optimizing. Yeah, I feel like
Yeah.
I hit a nerve there a bit.
Yep.
And,
You definitely did.